"You have always been so selfish, Natalie. What about family loyalty?" my father shouted across the holiday table, his face reddening as he gripped his wine glass so tightly I feared it might shatter. "I cannot believe you would refuse to help your own sister," my mother added, shaking her head with that familiar look of disappointment I had seen countless times throughout my life. I sat there, stunned into silence, as my carefully wrapped birthday gift, the one they had barely acknowledged minutes earlier, was snatched up by my father and tossed unceremoniously into the kitchen trash can. My name is Natalie Ruiz, and at 38 years old, I had spent my entire adult life being the responsible one. I put myself through college, diligently paid off every cent of my student loans 5 years ahead of schedule, and saved enough to purchase my modest home in Pittsburgh without a single dollar of family assistance. All while my younger sister Vanessa drifted between business ventures that inevitably collapsed due to her poor planning and financial management. The request from my parents had been breathtaking in its audacity. Sell my home, the one thing I had worked tirelessly to achieve, to bail out Vanessa's failed boutique, her third failed business in 5 years. When I gently but firmly declined, explaining that I couldn't sacrifice my financial security, I became the villain of the family narrative once again. Somehow, standing up for myself made me ungrateful in their eyes. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. The mortgage papers for my parents' house bore my signature as guarantor, a fact they conveniently overlooked whenever they criticized my life choices. When their credit couldn't qualify for their dream home 7 years ago, I had stepped in without hesitation. No conditions, no complaints. Just what I thought family was supposed to do for each other. Looking across the table at Vanessa, I noticed she couldn't meet my eyes. Perhaps some part of her recognized the injustice of the situation, but she remained silent as our parents continued their barrage. The tension in the room was suffocating, weighing down on my shoulders like an invisible boulder. Years of similar moments flashed through my mind, always being expected to sacrifice while Vanessa was coddled, always being the emergency fund while she pursued her dreams without consequence. Something inside me shifted. The familiar urge to apologize, to acquiesce just to keep the peace, evaporated. In its place, a calm resolve took hold. I knew what I needed to do, what I should have done long ago. I excused myself quietly from the table, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor as I stood. "Where are you going?" my mother called after me, her tone suggesting I was committing yet another offense by leaving. "To my car," I replied simply. "I'll be right back." Growing up as the eldest daughter in the Ruiz family had always meant one thing: responsibility. From a young age, I learned to be the dependable one, the steady hand, the voice of reason. While Vanessa was encouraged to follow her passions and express herself freely, I was subtly guided toward pragmatism and sacrifice. "You're the sensible one, Natalie," my mother would say, as if it were the highest compliment. What she really meant was that I could be counted on to clean up everyone else's messes. Our parents owned a small insurance agency in Pittsburgh that provided a comfortable living, but never quite enough to fund both Vanessa's expensive tastes and their own lifestyle. Somehow, the shortfall always became my problem to solve. When Vanessa needed money for art school in New York, I delayed my own graduate studies to work extra hours. When she dropped out after 2 semesters to find herself in Europe, I covered her credit card debt. When our parents wanted to renovate their kitchen, I contributed a significant portion of my savings. The pattern continued into adulthood. While I built my career as a financial analyst at Gravora Group, carefully saving and investing, Vanessa bounced between creative endeavors that inevitably ended in financial disaster. First the photography studio, then the handcrafted jewelry line, and finally, the boutique clothing store. All funded with family money, and all mismanaged into oblivion. Yet somehow, in the family mythology, Vanessa was the brave dreamer, while I was just boring. Reliable Natalie with her spreadsheets and emergency fund. 7 years ago, when our parents decided to purchase their dream home, a sprawling Victorian in an upscale neighborhood they couldn't actually afford, They came to me with earnest expressions and familiar appeals to family loyalty. "The bank needs a guarantor," my father had explained, sliding the paperwork across my kitchen table. "Just a formality, really. We'll make every payment." I hesitated then, sensing the weight of the commitment, but ultimately signed. After all, they were my parents. They had raised me, supported me in their way, and they promised this would be the last time they needed my help. It wasn't. Each year brought new emergencies that required my financial intervention. Each time, I told myself it would be the final time. Each time, I was wrong. The breaking point came gradually, then suddenly, like bankruptcy, as Hemingway might say. Small resentments accumulated, the forgotten birthdays, the dismissive comments about my career, the way they celebrated Vanessa's smallest achievements while taking my stability for granted. But I never expected the holiday dinner to become the final straw. When I returned to the dining room, file folder in hand, my family had already moved on to dessert, as if nothing had happened. My half-eaten dinner had been cleared away. My empty chair pushed in. The message was clear. The conversation was over, and they expected me to fall in line as I always had. "What's that?" my father asked, eyeing the folder with mild curiosity as I set it on the table. "Something I've been meaning to discuss with you both," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "I think now is an appropriate time." My mother's spoon clinked against her dessert plate as she set it down. "Really, Natalie? You're going to ruin the holiday with more drama?" The audacity of her statement after what had just occurred almost made me laugh, but I maintained my composure. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind many times, never quite believing I would follow through. But throwing my birthday gift in the trash, that casual cruelty had crystallized something for me. "I'm not here to create drama," I said, sliding the folder toward my father. "I'm here to clarify our financial arrangements going forward." My father opened the folder with furrowed brows. Inside were 3 documents: the original mortgage agreement with my signature as guarantor, a notice of intent to transfer ownership, and a formal letter explaining my decision to step away from all financial responsibility for my family members. As he read, I could see the color drain from his face. My mother, sensing his distress, leaned over to read along, her expression morphing from annoyance to disbelief. "What is this?" she whispered, looking up at me with wide eyes. "It's exactly what it appears to be," I replied calmly. "I'm removing myself as guarantor of your mortgage. I've transferred my stake to Aspen Capital Partners, a private equity firm that specializes in these arrangements." Vanessa, who had been scrolling through her phone, finally tuned in to the tension. "What's happening?" My father's hands trembled slightly as he set down the papers. "Your sister is abandoning us," he said, his voice a mixture of anger and fear. "After everything we've done for her." I felt a twinge of guilt, the programmed response of a lifetime, but pushed past it. "I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm simply establishing boundaries that should have been in place long ago." I explained that Aspen Capital would be contacting them within the week to discuss payment options. They could refinance, sell the house, or work out an arrangement with the firm. What they couldn't do was count on me to bail them out anymore. "You can't do this," my mother said, her voice rising. "We're your parents." "I can, and I am," I replied. "Being family doesn't mean I have to set myself on fire to keep everyone else warm. I deserve the same respect and consideration I've always given all of you." Vanessa stared at me, finally meeting my eyes across the table. For once, she looked genuinely shocked. Perhaps at the situation, perhaps at seeing me stand up for myself at last. The days following the holiday dinner unfolded in a blur of accusations and desperate attempts to make me reconsider. My phone buzzed constantly with messages and voicemails, each more frantic than the last. "You've always been jealous of your sister," my mother claimed in one particularly hurtful message. This is just your way of punishing us all for loving her, too. My father took a different approach, alternating between rage and manipulation. "After everything we sacrificed for you," he said during an unannounced visit to my office, his voice carrying across the open floor plan. "This is how you repay us?" I ushered him into a conference room, keenly aware of my colleagues' curious glances. "Dad, what sacrifices exactly? I put myself through college. I built my career without connections or help. I've been financially independent since I was 22. "We gave you life," he exclaimed, as if that entitled them to ownership of mine. "We raised you." "Yes, you did," I acknowledged, "and I'm grateful for that. But it doesn't mean I owe you my future." He left in a huff, but not before suggesting that if I just lent Vanessa enough to relaunch her boutique, perhaps $200,000, they might consider letting me stay on as guarantor of their mortgage instead of requiring me to sell my house outright. The audacity was breathtaking. They weren't even trying to negotiate. They were still making demands. Meanwhile, Vanessa employed a more subtle tactic, the false olive branch. "I never asked them to pressure you like this," she said over coffee at a neutral location. Her eyes were wide with practiced sincerity. "I just mentioned I was having financial difficulties, and they took it upon themselves to approach you." I stirred my latte slowly. "And yet you sat silently while they berated me and threw my gift in the trash." She had the grace to look embarrassed. I was shocked. I didn't know how to react. "You never do," I observed. "Not when it might mean standing up to them." Vanessa leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Look, I know I've made mistakes with my businesses, but this boutique concept is solid. I just need enough capital to relocate to a better location with more foot traffic. If you helped me—" "No," I said firmly, cutting her off. "I'm not investing in your business ventures anymore. 3 failures is enough data for me to recognize a pattern." Her expression hardened. "So that's it? You're just cutting off your entire family?" "I'm not cutting anyone off," I clarified. "I'm still here, still willing to have a relationship. What I'm no longer willing to do is be the family bank." She left without finishing her coffee, and I knew our conversation would be relayed to our parents with a very different spin. I would be painted as the villain again, cold, calculating, heartless. But something unexpected happened in the following days. As I stood firm against the emotional onslaught, I felt a strange lightness taking hold. Each refused demand, each boundary maintained, freed me a little more from the invisible chains I had carried for decades. At work, I found myself speaking up more in meetings, offering insights I might have previously kept to myself for fear of seeming too assertive. I started exploring opportunities for advancement that I had been hesitant to pursue, believing my family might need my financial stability. For the first time in my adult life, I was making decisions based solely on what was best for me. It was terrifying and exhilarating. Then came the call from Aspen Capital that would change everything. "Miss Ruiz? This is Dominic Weber from Aspen Capital Partners." The voice on the phone was professional but carried an undercurrent of concern. "Do you have a moment to discuss the Ruiz property transfer?" I closed my office door and settled into my chair. "Yes, of course. Is there an issue?" There was a brief pause. "I'm afraid there might be. We've been attempting to contact your parents to discuss refinancing options, but they've been uncooperative." "Uncooperative how?" I asked, though I already had my suspicions. "They're claiming you forged their signatures on the original mortgage documents," he said. "They're threatening legal action against both you and our firm." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. After everything I had done for them, they were now trying to paint me as a criminal. I took a deep breath, grateful for my foresight in documenting everything meticulously over the years. "Mr. Weber, I can assure you their signatures weren't forged. I have video recordings of the signing, witnesses present at the time, and additional documentation from the original lender. I'll send everything to you immediately." "That would be helpful," he said, sounding relieved. "One more thing. They mentioned they've secured a lawyer through a family friend, someone named Jason Wilson." My stomach dropped. Jason Wilson wasn't just any family friend. He was my ex-fiancé from 6 years ago. Our relationship had ended when I discovered he was funneling money from our joint account to Vanessa's first failing business behind my back. A loan that was never repaid. The betrayal had been devastating, but I had moved on, believing that chapter of my life was closed. "Miss Ruiz, are you still there?" "Yes," I said, my mind racing. "Thank you for letting me know. I'll have my lawyer contact you directly to handle this matter going forward." After ending the call, I sat motionless at my desk, trying to process this new layer of betrayal. They weren't just fighting me. They were deliberately trying to hurt me by bringing Jason back into my life. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a number I rarely used. My cousin Elena, a successful attorney who had always seen through my parents' manipulation. We had grown distant over the years, largely because my parents disapproved of her confrontational nature, which was really just her refusal to tolerate their behavior. "Natalie," she answered, sounding surprised. "Is everything okay?" "No," I admitted, "but I'm hoping you can help me make it right." Over the next hour, I explained everything: the mortgage, the holiday dinner, the attempted manipulation, and now the false accusations and Jason's involvement. Elena listened without interruption, and when I finished, her response was immediate and decisive. "Send me everything you have, and Natalie, it's about time you stood up to them." With Elena on board, I felt more confident in my position, but I also knew my parents and sister wouldn't back down easily. They had built their entire worldview around my compliance, and my rebellion threatened that foundation. The following day, a package arrived at my office. Inside was the birthday gift my father had thrown away, a custom-bound collection of family photographs I had carefully curated and restored. Attached was a note in my mother's handwriting. "We're still family. Don't do this to us." The manipulation was so transparent it almost made me laugh. Return the discarded gift as if it had never been thrown away, appealing to family bonds while simultaneously threatening me with false legal accusations. I placed the book on my shelf without opening it and texted Elena, "They're escalating. What's our next move?" Her response was immediate. "We call their bluff." 2 days later, Elena and I walked into the offices of Aspen Capital Partners for a meeting with my parents, Jason Wilson, and the firm's representatives. The conference room was tense with anticipation as we took our seats across from my family. Jason looked older than I remembered. The boyish charm that had once captivated me now hardened into something calculating. He barely met my eyes as he shuffled through his papers, clearly uncomfortable with the situation he'd been drawn into. My father sat rigidly in his chair, jaw clenched in defiance. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, the picture of maternal distress. Vanessa had chosen not to attend, sending a text that morning claiming she didn't want to be in the middle, as if she hadn't been a central figure in this drama from the beginning. Dominic Weber opened the meeting. "We're here to address the allegations regarding the mortgage agreement for the property at 742 Highland Avenue, currently owned by Gerald and Patricia Ruiz, with Natalie Ruiz as guarantor." My father leaned forward. "My daughter forged our signatures and is now trying to force us out of our home. It's elder abuse, plain and simple." I remained silent, letting Elena take the lead as we had discussed. "That's a serious allegation, Mr. Ruiz," she said calmly. "One that could have significant legal consequences for the accuser if proven false." She opened her laptop and turned it toward the room. "I have here the video recording of the original mortgage signing, taken by the notary public as part of their standard practice." The video began to play, clearly showing my parents signing the documents, expressing gratitude for my help, and promising this would be the last time they needed my financial assistance. "Additionally," Elena continued as the video ended, "I have statements from the notary and the bank representative present that day, confirming the signatures were made willingly and with full understanding of the terms. Jason shifted uncomfortably. These could be doctored or taken out of context. They're certified copies, Mr. Wilson, Elena interrupted. And we have the originals secured with timestamps and authentication. But perhaps more relevant to your client's concerns is this. She slid a document across the table. This is a full accounting of all financial assistance Natalie has provided to the Ruiz family over the past 15 years. Loans never repaid, investments in Vanessa's businesses with no return, contributions to household expenses, and various emergencies. The total comes to approximately $387,000, not including the mortgage guarantee. My mother gasped. That's absurd. We never... Every transaction is documented, Elena said firmly. Bank transfers, checks, credit card statements. Natalie has kept meticulous records. The room fell silent as the magnitude of what they owed me, financially and morally, sank in. Dominic Weber cleared his throat. In light of this information, does your client wish to maintain their allegations of forgery, Mr. Wilson? Jason looked at my father, who seemed suddenly deflated. We'll need to confer privately. They were given a smaller meeting room, and while they were gone, Dominic turned to me. Miss Ruiz, may I ask why you maintained this arrangement for so long? I considered the question carefully. They're my family. I always believed that eventually they would recognize the imbalance and want to make things right. I was wrong. When my parents and Jason returned, the change in their demeanor was striking. My father's defiance had crumbled, replaced by a calculating pragmatism. We're prepared to withdraw our allegations, Jason announced, and to discuss refinancing options for the mortgage. Elena nodded. That's a start. But there are additional terms my client requires before we can move forward. As she outlined my conditions, a formal acknowledgement of the debt they owed me, a legally binding agreement to cease all financial demands, and a commitment to family counseling, I saw something I had never witnessed before. My parents listening, truly listening, to my needs. It wasn't quite victory, but it was the beginning of something new. 3 months after the meeting at Aspen Capital, I sat across from my family at a restaurant chosen for its neutral territory. This wasn't a celebration or a reconciliation. It was a reckoning. My parents had sold their dream house. The Victorian that had been the physical manifestation of their entitlement now belonged to another family. They had downsized to a comfortable condo that better suited their actual financial situation and used the remaining equity to partly address their debt to me. They looked different somehow, smaller, less imposing. My father's perpetual confidence had given way to a quiet sobriety. My mother's theatrical emotions had been replaced by a careful restraint. We've signed up for the financial counseling program, my father said, sliding a registration confirmation across the table. The first session is next week. I nodded, accepting the paper without comment. It was one of my non-negotiable conditions, that they learn to manage their finances responsibly rather than relying on others to bail them out. And we've been talking to Vanessa about her spending habits, my mother added. She's agreed to meet with the counselor too. Vanessa, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, looked up from her menu. I've taken a job at Gravenhurst Freight, she said. In their marketing department. It's entry-level, but it's steady. The surprise must have shown on my face because she quickly added, I know it's not as exciting as running my own boutique, but after looking at the numbers, really looking at them, I realized I was never as close to success as I thought. It was perhaps the most honest thing my sister had ever said to me. Not an apology, not quite, but an acknowledgement of reality that had been sorely lacking in our family dynamic. That sounds like a good opportunity, I said, meaning it. Their marketing team has a strong reputation. A tentative smile crossed her face, not the dazzling, manipulative charm she usually employed, but something more genuine. Thanks. I'm trying. The changes in my family didn't happen overnight. and they weren't without setbacks. There were still tense phone calls, still moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. My mother still occasionally hinted at financial emergencies that turned out to be wants rather than needs. My father still struggled with seeing me as an autonomous adult rather than an extension of their financial resources. But the difference was that now there were consequences for crossing my boundaries. When they pushed too hard, I would simply end the conversation and enforce a cooling-off period. No drama, no arguments, just consistent reinforcement that the old dynamics were no longer acceptable. Elena remained a steady presence in my life, helping me navigate the complex emotions of reconstructing my family relationships on healthier terms. "It's like rehabilitation after an injury," she said during one of our regular lunch meetings. "There will be pain, there will be resistance, but if you stick with the program, eventually there's healing." At work, the changes in my personal life translated to professional growth. Freed from the constant drain on my emotional and financial resources, I found myself taking risks I would have previously avoided. I applied for a senior position that opened up at Gravora Group and was selected from a competitive field of candidates. "Your presentation showed a confidence we haven't seen from you before," my new director told me after the announcement. "Whatever changed in the past few months, it suits you." What had changed was fundamental. I had reclaimed my power, my resources, and my right to prioritize my own well-being. The weight I had carried for so long hadn't just been financial. It had been the crushing burden of being needed but never valued, of giving without receiving, of love conditioned on sacrifice. The most surprising revelation came from Vanessa during a coffee meeting. Just the two of us. "You know, I resented you for years," she admitted, stirring her drink absently. "You always seemed so perfect, so together. I felt like I could never measure up." I almost laughed at the irony. While I was resenting you for getting all the support and encouragement I never received. She looked genuinely shocked. "What? But they were always bragging about you. Their successful daughter with the corporate job and the nice house." "To others, maybe," I said. "Never to me." That conversation marked a turning point in our relationship. Not an instant transformation into the close sisters we had never been, but the beginning of an honest dialogue that held the potential for something authentic. As for my parents, they were learning, slowly, reluctantly, that respect was a prerequisite for a relationship with me, not an optional extra. The family counseling sessions were revealing patterns that had been invisible to all of us, generations of financial manipulation and emotional control that had been normalized through repetition. The journey toward healing was just beginning, but for the first time, I was facing my family as an equal, not a resource to be depleted, but a person worthy of consideration and respect. The mortgage that had once bound us in an unhealthy dynamic had ultimately forced a necessary reckoning. Sometimes it seemed the most profound revenge isn't in causing pain to those who hurt you, but in reclaiming what should have been yours all along: your autonomy, your dignity, and your right to define the terms of your relationships. As I drove home from our latest family meeting, I realized that the greatest victory wasn't in watching my parents downsize or seeing my sister take a conventional job. It was in the knowledge that regardless of what happened with them going forward, I was finally free. Free to build the life I wanted, on my terms, without guilt or obligation weighing me down. In seeking justice, I had found something far more valuable: peace.